Hi, I'm Maribel. On the day we buried my father, I found out my name had been erased from his will. Erased like I never existed. My sister stood there in black, smiling like the company was hers. Like I hadn't been the one who built it with him from the ground up. They told the town I abandoned my family. But what if I was forced out all along? What if everything they celebrated was built on a lie? One they hoped I'd be too late to uncover? Do you know what it feels like to show up to your own father's funeral and be treated like a stranger? Keep watching. You're going to want to see what I did next. The heat in Savannah had a way of making silence feel louder. As I stood on the front porch of my childhood home, suitcase in one hand and a paper coffee cup trembling in the other, I could feel the sweat crawling down the back of my neck. But it wasn't the summer air that made my skin itch. The house looked almost the same, yet completely wrong. The hydrangeas that once bloomed in my mother's garden were gone, replaced by manicured hedges that screamed of Callista's taste. The wind chimes Dad had hung decades ago were silent, their strings cut clean. I hesitated at the door, but no one came to open it. I didn't knock. I hadn't set foot here in 6 years. Not since the last fight, the one that ended in slammed doors and long flights. But grief has a funny way of pulling you back into places you swore you'd never return. I came to say goodbye to my father. That was the plan. A neighbor, Mrs. Dandridge, still in her floral apron, saw me by the curb as she clipped roses. She smiled, then faltered. "I suppose you're headed to the will reading this afternoon," she said, voice unsure. "It's at 2, the lawyer's office downtown." I blinked. "What will reading?" She paused, clearly realizing her misstep. "Oh, I assumed. I mean, you're his daughter. Of course they—" I nodded slowly. "Thank you," and walked away before I could hear another awkward apology. But that was the moment I knew. I hadn't been informed because I wasn't meant to be there. By the time I made it to the front door, it opened. Callista stood there in a perfectly pressed black dress, her hair in a tight bun like she was auditioning for Widow of the Year. She looked at me the way you look at dust that won't sweep away. "They're only inviting the people named," she said, stepping aside but not inviting me in. "You understand?" I stared at her for a moment. "Of course," I replied, voice flat. She didn't offer a hug or a handshake, just silence. That was her version of closure. Inside, the house had changed. No framed photos of me remained in the hallway. I peeked at the local newspaper on the console table, the obituary page. There it was. His name, his legacy, his surviving children, Callista Harrison. No mention of me. My breath caught. A dull pain settled at the base of my ribs. Not sharp, not loud. Just present. Like a bruise you forgot was there until someone pressed it. The funeral was held at the same church we used to walk past every Sunday. I didn't sit inside. Instead, I stood under the live oaks, where the shade gave me enough cover to disappear. I watched through the stained glass windows as the guests moved like slow waves. No one turned. No one searched for me. After the service, people spilled into the front garden. I caught snippets of conversation, laughter, condolences, lies wrapped in Southern charm. No one noticed me. That was fine. I had grown used to being invisible to them. As the crowd thinned, I sat on the stone bench behind the sanctuary. The same spot where, years ago, Dad had taught me how to read property deeds. He'd pulled a thick folder from his briefcase and said, "This, Maribel, is how we build things that last longer than people." I'd been 12, wearing braces, trying to pretend I understood. But I remembered that moment, not because of the lesson, but because he looked at me like I mattered. Back at the motel, the air conditioning was too cold, too loud. I dropped my suitcase by the door and pulled my old satchel onto the bed. The leather was cracked with age. Inside, beneath receipts and an old business card from when I thought I'd start over in Asheville, I found a manila envelope. It had my name on it. My full name. His handwriting. For Maribel. If they lock you out. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't just a letter. It was a plan. Dad had always believed in having contingencies, and he knew them. He knew Callista. I opened the envelope. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the corners. Inside, there wasn't a thick packet or pages of legal language, just a single cardstock sheet, my father's handwriting as familiar as my own breath. Don't forget who you are. Not, I love you. Not, I'm sorry. Just that. A command, maybe. Or a plea. I folded the note and slipped it back into the envelope. Whatever he meant, I had no time to figure it out standing in a musty motel room. By late afternoon, I was back at the house. No one stopped me at the door. It was unlocked, which felt strange for a home that had become a fortress of silence. I stepped inside. The air smelled like bleach and roses, Callista's version of clean and elegant. The living room had been redone. Everything was sterile, like it belonged in a magazine spread about success, not the house we grew up in. The worn leather armchair where Dad used to read the paper was gone, replaced with some abstract piece that looked like it hurt to sit in. The walls were white, too white. All texture of memory had been stripped clean. I heard heels clicking down the hallway and turned. Callista walked past me without pausing. No nod, no glance, just the soft whiff of her expensive perfume and a cold front of indifference. It said more than any insult could. I took a breath and headed toward the old west hallway, where my room used to be. The door was still there, still painted in the pale green I chose at 15. But when I turned the knob, it didn't budge. I jiggled it gently, then harder. Locked. A voice behind me, soft but intentional, came from the cleaning lady who was fluffing the guest pillows down the hall. She didn't look up as she said, "Miss Callista said it's now the home office. Nobody's to go in." For a second, I stood frozen, my hand still on the doorknob. Then I let it go and stepped back. Keyless, nameless, useless. I didn't belong in a place that used to be mine. I made my way to the hallway near the dining room, searching for something familiar. Something that hadn't been overwritten. The family photos that once lined the walls were gone. In their place were framed degrees, awards, and glossy photos of Callista at various charity events. One large frame caught my eye. A family portrait. Dad at the center, Callista beside him. I remembered the original. It had been taken when I was 17. But in this version, I was cropped out. The space where I had stood was now an elegant vase in the background. In the living room, a few guests were gathered. Distant cousins, business partners, the kind of people who attend funerals for networking. No one looked up when I entered. I walked to the far end of the room, stood behind the sofa, watching the conversations roll on without me. On the mantel was a new photo, Callista and Dad, shaking hands in front of the Harrison Properties banner, smiling like co-founders of a future I was never invited to. My chest didn't ache. It locked, as if someone had pressed a cold palm over my heart and said, "Not yours." I stepped back. The room shrank, the people blurred. I turned and left without a sound, exiting through the back door that opened onto the garden. The porch was just as I remembered it, except cleaner, colder. The wind had shifted. The tree where Dad once carved my initials was no longer there. In its place, a sculpted bird bath sat perfectly centered. The initials, the bark, the memory, gone, like a stain wiped off too well. I sat on the steps, staring out at the horizon that used to hold backyard barbecues, teenage fights, quiet reconciliations. Now it held nothing. My phone buzzed in my lap, no name, just a number I didn't recognize. I opened the message. Check the bookshelf. He left more than just memories. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The message stayed on my screen long after I'd read it. Check the bookshelf. He left more than just memories. I didn't reply. There wasn't anything to say, only things to do. I waited until the house grew quieter. Callista's muffled voice drifted from the den, blending with the clinking of glasses and shallow laughter. Another performance for the well-connected. I used to care how she portrayed herself. Now, I cared only about what Dad had hidden away from her. I slipped into the hallway and made my way toward the study. It was the only room she hadn't redesigned. Not out of respect, I assumed, but out of fear that touching it would make her look possessive too soon. The door creaked open under my hand. I flipped the switch. Nothing. The light bulb had gone out. The room smelled of old paper, cedar, and time. It hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Dust clung to the edges of the desk, and shelves like forgotten intentions. I stepped inside, my hand brushing the spines of books that once lined my father's nights. Historical biographies, legal codes, novels with worn covers, and notes in the margins. One title stood out, The Count of Monte Cristo. I pulled it gently from the shelf, the familiar weight of it settling in my palms. He gave this to me for my 16th birthday. Inside, his inscription, to Maribel, because vengeance should always be earned, never stolen. I smiled, then opened the book. A folded envelope slipped out from between pages, 314 and 315. My name again. My full name, not Mari, not Sweet Pea, just Maribel, in his steady hand. I unfolded the letter slowly. It wasn't long, but it landed like a thunderclap. If you found this, it means I couldn't protect you openly. But I never stopped trying. The family is being led by appearances now, not values. I've transferred key properties to your name through alternate trusts. Enclosed is a key marked A13. The rest waits for you in the attic. And Maribel, I never regretted naming you my successor, not once. I sat down hard in the old leather chair, letter clutched in one hand, book still open in the other. I didn't cry. Not exactly. But my throat closed, and I let the silence wash over me. A soft knock on the door startled me. Leif, Callista's 10-year-old son, peeked his head inside. "Aunt Mari?" he said like a secret. I wiped my eyes quickly. "Yeah, buddy?" He stepped in, holding a half-eaten cookie. "Mom says you're like a ghost here, that you used to live in the walls but forgot how to be real." I laughed once, sharp, bitter. "She say that exactly?" He nodded, then frowned. "Is that bad?" "No," I said quietly. "It means she's scared." He looked confused, then smiled. "I like when you're here." And just like that, he was gone again, the door clicking shut behind him. I turned back to the desk, feeling something shift. I wasn't just reclaiming property, I was reclaiming truth, and I wasn't doing it in whispers anymore. I began checking every drawer. The third one from the bottom stuck slightly, but I managed to open it. Taped underneath, barely visible, was a small key with a worn label, A13. I closed my fingers around it. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like a warning. Rain hadn't fallen yet, but it would. I stood, walked out of the study, and stared up at the narrow attic ladder near the end of the hall. If he left it for me, then it's time I stopped waiting for permission. I stood at the bottom of the attic steps for a long moment after tucking the key into my pocket. The house was quiet again, the way it always seemed to be just before a storm. Not the kind with thunder, but the kind where truths start to crack through walls. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the foyer. I walked downstairs slowly, heels silent on the wooden floor, not because I was sneaking, but because the house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a stranger's home that just happened to know my name. I turned the corner and stopped short when I heard Callista's voice from the study. She wasn't alone. Once the will's read tomorrow, it's locked. She can't contest it unless she's named, and she's not, Callista said. Her tone was calm, confident, the way she always sounded when she thought she'd won. Garrison's voice followed. The legal wording is solid, but if she finds anything unexpected, well, it could make things messy. We'd need to delay filings. There was a pause, the kind you hear between two people deciding just how far they're willing to go. She won't, Callista said flatly. She's too sentimental. She'll dig up letters, maybe some dusty papers, but none of it holds weight. I backed away before they saw me, My hands curled into fists. Sentimental? Maybe. But now I had a key, a tin box, and documents they didn't know existed. And if they thought I'd go down quietly, they were about to learn what silence could really do. Back in the guest room, I locked the door and opened the tin box again, laying out every page across the bed. Names, dates, notarizations, legal transfers my father had tucked away like seeds, planted to grow once the noise settled. One document in particular stopped me cold. It was a purchase agreement dated just 6 months ago. A downtown commercial lot, signed off as sold under my name. Except it wasn't my signature. I traced the curves of the letters. At first glance, it looked like mine. But I knew the difference. The way the R looped too high. The way the I was dotted too early. It was a forgery. My stomach dropped, but not from fear, from certainty. This wasn't just inheritance manipulation. This was outright fraud. There was a soft knock on the door. I swept the documents into a pile and tucked them under the mattress before opening it. Odessa stood there, hands clasped. She didn't look like the same woman from the funeral. No pearls, no forced grief, just tired eyes and a folded piece of paper in her hand. "I found this in your father's drawer," she said quietly. "Didn't want it to be lost in the shuffle." She handed it to me without another word and walked away. Inside was a short note, written in Dad's unmistakable scrawl. "She'll try to make it all disappear, but the law isn't hers. The name is yours. Use it." That night, I didn't sleep. I reviewed every document, every form, every piece of legal language he had buried in plain sight. I highlighted, sorted, and cataloged it like I used to do back when I managed logistics in New York. By sunrise, I had a binder, a backup copy, and a quiet fire inside me. As the morning light crept into the room, I walked out into the garden. The air was still, the sky painted in soft pink and gray. At the far end, I saw them again, Callista and Garrison, standing by the garden gate. This time, I didn't turn away. I walked along the stone path, far enough not to hear them, but close enough that they'd see me. And I made sure I didn't look down or rush my steps. When I reached the edge of the lawn, I paused, facing the old oak stump where my father once carved our initials. It had been chopped down, replaced with a stone planter, but I remembered where it stood, and that was enough. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the space, not for evidence, just for me. Back inside, I changed into a navy suit, the one I wore when closing my biggest deal 5 years ago. I brushed my hair back, tied it low, and clipped a silver pin my father once gave me to the lapel. Then I picked up the tin box, placed it beside my bed, and texted Clarice. "Prepare everything. I want my name off every lie they've built." Chapter 5. I climbed down from the attic with the tin box pressed tightly to my chest. It was heavier than it looked, both in weight and what it might hold. My father never did anything without a reason, and if he had hidden something away up there for years, it was because he knew what Callista was capable of. The hallway lights flickered slightly as I stepped down into the main corridor. The house had grown quiet. Most of the guests had left for the day. Somewhere in the kitchen, the sound of silverware clinked faintly. I moved toward the staircase, only to see Callista coming up from the foyer. She paused mid-step, our eyes meeting like a stale standoff. I didn't wait. "Whatever you think you've buried," I said evenly, "I've already started digging it up." Her lips twitched into that same rehearsed smile she gave at board meetings. "Your name doesn't open anything in this house." "Maybe not," I replied, taking a single step closer. "But it's written on more than you think." She didn't respond, just turned and walked away with a dismissive wave of her hand, the queen of pretending nothing could shake her crown. I didn't waste energy watching her leave. I headed straight for the guest room and locked the door behind me. I placed the box on the desk, popped the latches open, and carefully sorted through what lay inside. It was all there: legal documents, estate files, property listings, some with signatures already notarized. At first, I flipped through without focus, but then I saw it. A purchase agreement. A familiar property. My name printed neatly. A sale date. Recent. A signature. Mine. Except, it wasn't mine. I stared at the signature, then at the notarization stamp. The handwriting looked close, but off. The loops on the M too round. The last L curved the wrong direction. It was a forgery. Someone had sold off one of my father's properties using my name. I sat down slowly, placing the document flat against the desk. My pulse slowed, my anger sharpening. Not explosive, focused, deliberate. Whoever did this thought I'd walk away quietly. Again. There was a folded note tucked between the pages of a ledger. My eyes caught the edge of my name in blue ink. I opened it, expecting another jab, another signature theft. But it wasn't that. It was from Odessa. She hadn't been around much since the funeral. Quiet, drifting, almost like a shadow at the edge of things. But here she was in ink. Maribel, your father gave you the power. Don't question that. He trusted you because you saw through the noise. You always did. Just know, if they crossed the law will speak back. Use your name carefully and use it first. No sentiment, no explanation, just clarity. That, from Odessa, meant more than any speech. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, trying to slow the heat rising in my chest. This wasn't about being invited anymore. It wasn't about chairs at funerals or names in obituaries. This was about theft. Real, legal, moral theft. And I was done whispering. If I let this slide, I murmured to no one, what else would they take? The sun had started to dip by the time I stepped out into the garden. The light turned orange, casting shadows that danced on the stone path. I saw them then, Callista and Garrison, standing near the old garden wall, speaking in hushed tones. She gestured sharply, arms crossed. He stood still, nodding occasionally, face unreadable. They didn't see me, or maybe they did, and didn't care. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. I'd stopped chasing explanations. I wasn't asking anymore. I was planning. Tomorrow was the will reading. Let them believe they still held all the cards. Let them keep sipping wine and making promises behind closed doors. By dusk, I was back in my room. I placed the tin box beside the nightstand, then pulled out my phone. Clarice was still saved in my contacts. I typed out a short message. Prepare everything. I want my name off every lie they've built. And I hit send. Chapter 6. By the time I stepped into the formal sitting room the next morning, the air felt thinner, as if it had been drained of all pretense. Callista sat at the head of the table, draped in tailored black, her expression carved from marble. Garrison stood behind her, clipboard in hand, as if his presence alone could silence dissent. I took the seat at the far end, not out of submission, but strategy. Let them underestimate me. They always did. Harold Stevenson shuffled his papers in a deliberate rhythm. He cleared his throat and launched into the preamble. Callista offered him a tight-lipped smile, the kind you see on politicians who think the cameras are still rolling. Around the table, familiar faces sat with polite distance, some curious, some cautious. Harold continued reading. To my daughter Callista Harrison, I appoint executor of my estate, trustee of residual assets, and primary beneficiary of Harrison Properties. The rest blurred into static. Legal jargon, obligatory phrases, the cadence of someone who'd done this far too many times. My name was never spoken. Callista leaned back in her chair, gaze flicking toward me with something close to satisfaction. Her hand rested lightly on the table, not gripping, just claiming. I reached for my leather folder and unzipped it slowly. The sound sliced through the quiet like a violin string stretched too far. This, I said calmly, sliding 3 documents forward, is the deed to the Savannah Wharf development, signed over to me 3 years ago. This one, Riverfront Lofts, also mine, and this, Oak Ridge Estates. Gasps. Not loud, but real. Even Harold blinked twice. Callista's smile twitched. I looked at Harold. Would you like to verify the county filings? He reached forward without a word. As he reviewed them, I heard murmurs starting down the length of the table. Someone whispered my name. Another voice said, "That can't be real." But no one moved. Rowena stepped from the back of the room, holding a manila envelope. "I mailed those deeds myself," she said, voice firm. "Your father had me take them to the notary. He didn't trust putting it through Callista." Harold paused. He looked up slowly, brow furrowed. "These are legitimate." Callista stood abruptly. "This is absurd. That paperwork was sealed. You don't get to rewrite the will with smoke and mirrors." I didn't rise. I didn't even flinch. "You built lies around my absence," I replied, "while I built legal walls you didn't know existed." Her face hardened. "You were gone, Maribel. You left. You abandoned this family." "No," I said, my voice low but clear. "I was erased. There's a difference." Harold looked between us. If these properties were transferred during Mr. Harrison's lifetime, they fall outside the scope of the will. The room tilted. Or maybe it was just Callista's posture collapsing inward. The shift was palpable. The investors began whispering more freely now. A board member from across the room adjusted his tie, clearly recalibrating his allegiances. Even Garrison looked away. I stood. "This isn't a fight anymore," I said. "It's a transfer of ownership, of legacy, of truth." I turned toward my sister. "You tried to bury what Dad left for me, but I've already unearthed it." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Such Chapter 7. The morning after the will reading, I sat alone at a table by the window of Archer's Cafe. The same cafe where Dad used to meet his contractor over strong black coffee in silence. Today, I had no appetite for nostalgia. The waitress set down my drink and a folded copy of The Savannah Journal. Her smile was tight. "You might want to skip the front page, hun." That's exactly where I turned. There, in bold serif font, was Callista's name, flanked by a headline that read, "Callista Harrison, Leading Harrison Legacy with Grace and Vision." The entire article was a puff piece, painting her as the daughter who never left, the heir who had carried her father's final wishes. It praised her leadership, her philanthropic ties, her selfless dedication to the Harrison estate. Nowhere, not once, was my name mentioned, not even in passing. I kept reading. According to sources close to the family, the article stated, Ms. Maribel Harrison left town years ago and only resurfaced after Mr. Harrison's passing. Her role in the estate remains, at best, unclear. I folded the paper without a word. Outside the cafe window, 2 older women walked by. One of them slowed when she saw me, whispered something into the other's ear, and kept moving. A man I hadn't seen since high school muttered, "Back in town again?" as he passed my table. The narrative was already spinning. Callista wasn't just controlling the assets. She was writing the history books. By noon, she was standing on the courthouse steps with a row of microphones and perfectly windswept hair. I watched from the cafe TV as she thanked the community for their trust during a delicate transition. She mentioned last-minute confusion over legal filings and asked for privacy and unity in honoring our father's vision. It was rehearsed, sickly sweet, and incredibly effective. But not for long. That afternoon, I walked into the Harrison Properties boardroom with Clarice by my side and a flash drive in my coat pocket. The same coat my father gave me when I moved to New York. "For the wind and the fight," he'd said. We didn't speak as we set up the laptop at the head of the table. Board members shuffled in slowly. Callista entered last, visibly annoyed to see me sitting at what used to be Dad's chair. I plugged in the flash drive. Clarice clicked play. The screen lit up with the face of a man who looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner, paler, but still unmistakably him. Dad. He was seated in his study, tie loose around his neck, eyes clear. "If you're watching this," he said softly, It means I didn't get to say goodbye. A pause. My daughter Maribel is my legacy. She's the one I trust with what I built, because she understands its foundation. She doesn't need the spotlight. She knows what matters. No one moved. No one dared breathe. She wasn't absent, he continued. She was kept out. And that's my fault. I let ego and noise cloud what I already knew. She's the one. Always was. The video ended. No applause, no gasps, just stunned silence. One board member leaned over to the man beside him and whispered, "He never said anything like that in public." Clarice stepped back. I stood. "I'm not here to gloat," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm here to correct a lie." I looked directly at Callista. "You told everyone I left." He told the truth. I was asked to leave, and I did. But I came back, because I still believe in what he built, and I won't let you bury that under press releases and backroom deals. She looked at me with eyes that finally blinked uncertainty. I walked to Dad's old desk, picked up the brass nameplate that once sat on his office door. His name engraved with weight and pride. I turned to Callista one last time. "You have 36 hours to step back," I said. "After that, I go public." Chapter 8. The courthouse steps felt less daunting than they did the first time I'd walked them. Maybe because this time, I wasn't coming in with grief. I was walking in with truth. Clarice was already inside, waiting with my attorney. Both of them calm in that way only people holding real power could be. We filed the civil suit without ceremony. Fraud, misrepresentation, unauthorized transactions. Each word felt like a nail hammered straight into the coffin Callista had tried to build around my reputation. Reporters stood nearby, eyes sharp, cameras rolling. I said nothing to them. I didn't need to. The paperwork said it all. Facts, dates, notarized signatures, and a paper trail my sister didn't know I had. By midday, headlines were already spreading. Harrison's sister files lawsuit. Internal family conflict becomes legal showdown. But I didn't feed the frenzy. I issued a brief statement, clear and dry. We are pursuing the appropriate legal channels to ensure Mr. Harrison's estate is handled according to law and fact. No embellishments, no commentary, just precision. Afterward, back at the office, Clarice handed me an envelope she'd been holding for weeks. "He asked me to give this to you when it mattered most," she said. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small voice recorder. I unfolded the page. It was written in Dad's hand. "Not for court. For her." I pressed play. "Maribel," his voice rasped. It had lost its weight, but not its intent. "They'll want the company, the properties, the story. Callista always wanted to lead. Your brother wanted profits. But you wanted roots." A long pause. "You were never meant to be the loudest, just the most enduring." I sat in silence for a long moment before slipping the recorder into my drawer and tucking the note into my wallet. 2 hours later, I stood before the shareholders of Harrison Properties during an emergency meeting. The room buzzed with tension. Most had heard about the lawsuit. Some tried not to make eye contact. Callista stormed in halfway through, her heels clicking like gunfire on the marble floor. "You can't do this," she snapped, arms tight against her sides. "You think you can stage a takeover by slapping my name in a lawsuit? This is desperation, not strategy." I didn't flinch. "Everything I've done is documented. Every transfer, every meeting, every trust. You buried my name, but I built a paper trail." "You were gone," she hissed. "You ran away." "No," I said. "I was told to leave, but I never stopped watching. You counted on silence. I chose evidence." The board members didn't interrupt. They didn't have to. The tide had already turned. When it came time to vote, they raised their hands, one by one, quiet but decisive. Clarice stood to announce the result. Effective immediately, Maribel Harrison is appointed interim CEO, pending resolution of the ongoing investigation. Callista Harrison is suspended from operational duties. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was cleansing. Callista didn't speak. She just walked out. No eye contact. No final word. Just the sharp echo of her heels fading behind the closing door. Later that day, I sat in my father's office, now mine. I opened the drawer he used to keep photos in. There were only a few left. One of him and me at the construction site of our first project together. I placed it beside a recent one of myself, taken weeks before his death. We looked older, wiser, connected. The room didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt held. I picked up the phone and dialed the town planning board. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready to restart the riverfront project, under my father's terms." Chapter 9. 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of the riverfront property. The finalized development plans rolled beneath my arm. The construction signs had just gone up, and a new crew was surveying the lot. I could almost hear my father's voice describing how this stretch of river would anchor the town's renewal. Not with luxury condos, but with community parks, mixed-use buildings, and walkable space that felt like home. That vision belonged to him. Now it was mine to finish. On the walk back to the office, a man at the corner grocery stopped me. "You're Richard's girl, right?" he said, not unkindly. About time somebody with some sense took the reins. He tipped his hat. "Good luck." Others were less direct. Just nods, slight smiles. Some avoided eye contact altogether, like their silence might erase the things they'd said or believed about me just a few weeks ago. Still, progress was progress. That afternoon, the Savannah Journal printed a quiet correction on page 4. In a previous article, it was stated that Maribel Harrison had no role in the Harrison Properties estate. We now understand that she is serving as interim CEO, as appointed by the board. We regret the omission. Small font, no headline. But it was something. Callista's exit from Savannah came without ceremony. No farewell party, no press conference, just a moving truck, a closed bank account, and a voicemail she left on my office phone. "You got what you wanted. Hope it was worth it." I didn't respond. What could I have said that would make a difference now? At the company, change moved forward with quiet purpose. I kept my promise to hold weekly staff meetings, open, honest, practical. We talked about community engagement, infrastructure, maintenance budgets, no speeches, just structure. Clarice officially stepped into the role of senior counsel, taking over much of what Garrison had once controlled behind closed doors. Rowena declined the offer to return in any formal way, but before she left, she handed me an envelope with the original key to the old study. "He trusted you with the front door," she said. "This was always yours." Later that week, I returned to the garden behind the family house. The birdbath Callista had installed was gone, removed without my needing to ask. I carried a small sapling and dug into the earth where the old tree once stood. Hands dirty, knees in the grass, I placed the new tree upright. A symbol, yes, but more than that. An act. Of closure. Of beginning again. Before the sun dipped too low, I stopped by Dad's grave with the new blueprints in hand. The headstone was simple, nothing flashy. Just his name, his birth and death years, and the words, "Builder of Futures." I sat beside the marker and unfolded the plans. "It's safe now," I whispered. "You can rest?" And then, quieter, "So can I." On my way back through the square, I passed the community board near the children's park. A few kids played nearby, racing each other on bikes. One of them laughed so hard he almost tipped over. Pinned at the top of the board was a rendering of the riverfront renewal. Beneath it, in clean, bold letters, "In memory of Richard Harrison, reimagined by Maribel." What my father left me wasn't just a legacy of properties. It was a lesson in resilience, in values, in knowing who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. It took losing my place in the family, my name in a will, and nearly my voice in the noise to finally understand that your worth isn't given. It's built, defended, and lived. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause or closure. It comes in small moments, when the truth finally stands taller than the lie. When a door once closed reopens, not because someone invited you in, but because you brought the key. If you're watching this and you've ever been shut out, underestimated, or told you didn't belong, I want you to remember, silence isn't surrender. It can be the most powerful strategy when you know who you are and why you're still standing. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been written off by your own family, or had to fight silently for what was already yours? Drop a comment and let's talk about it. And hey, if this story touched something in you, type a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I'd truly love to connect. And if you didn't like the video, that's okay too. Tell me why, and maybe how your story turned out differently. If you want more stories that speak to real struggles, quiet triumphs, and finding your way back when the world pushes you out, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to come.